9 a.m. Geneva time, we will now be launching this event.
Well, good morning, everybody here in the room in Geneva, and a very warm greeting to all of those who are in different time zones. And I know that we are covering with the online participants a number of these time zones. Welcome to the first event of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks of 2023. It's the third edition of these Geneva Toxic Free Talks. And we're very happy now to start this the edition of this year with this event. My name is Yves Lador. I represent Earth Justice at the UN here in Geneva, and I have the privilege to be the moderator of this first session. One of the reasons of having this Geneva Toxic Free Talk is that human rights in the field of chemicals and pollution is largely a reality check. There are, of course, international environmental laws. There are specific treaties on toxics and pollutions. How do they function? To see it through the lens of human rights gives us a good analysis of how effective these different bodies are. We have seen over the last years a number of unpleasant developments. We see more and more greenwashing rhetoric. And that is not only linked to climate change. And we will have the privilege on Friday to have a specific event co-organized with the Permanent Mission of Chile on the report of the Special Rapporteur to the current session of the Human Rights Council on how to detoxify the decarbonization process. But it's not only linked to climate change that we have this type of evolution. A number of new products are coming out regularly, and very often are presented as being solutions when actually they are toxic solutions. So it's a real challenge in the field of human rights and toxics. So in order to look at this issue, we wanted also to start by looking at a possible tool that can help. It doesn't solve all of the issues, but it can help in to try to avoid these type of toxic solution, and that is environmental impact assessment. A number of international treaties like the Aarhus Convention or the Escazú Agreement are providing strong legal obligations that can orientate how an environmental impact assessment is conducted. It is not universal yet, but if we remember the ICJ ruling on the paper mill case, it is clear that it's something which is needed everywhere and that it should be universal. So we have the privilege to have with us, and we will start by that, an excellent example on how this has been developed in the Aarhus Convention. And then afterwards, for this event, we'll have the opportunity to go through a number of very specific examples where we see this trend of having more and more toxic solutions. But first, I would like to give the floor to the Special Rapporteur, with whom we are organizing all of these events. He is really the leading line in all of these events. And Marcos Orellana, you just presented, as I said, your report to the Human Rights Council, which tackles one of the aspects, which is linked to climate change. But I know that you're very keen in making sure that this is a global issue for your mandate. The floor is yours for a few words of introduction.
Thank you very much, Yves, and thanks also to the Geneva Environment Network. It's a real privilege to once again open and be a participant in the Geneva Toxic Free Talks this time in 2023. So a few words about disinformation and greenwashing, the topic that we're addressing in this opening panel. You may recall the report I presented to the Council on the Right to Science, where I spoke about disinformation as a tool often used by vested interests to deliberately obfuscate public opinion, to confuse society, and in that way to delay or divert attention from the necessary regulatory movements that would be based on best available evidence, scientific evidence. In subsequent reports, I've addressed these issues and talked about false solutions or misleading solutions when it comes to plastics and plastic pollution, for example. issues of incineration and the generation of unintended persistent organic pollutants, or issues of recycling. I call that a mirage that, again, diverts attention because current technologies, given the amount of toxic additives in plastics, are not able of recycling plastics in a way that has been touted by the plastics industry. As Yves, you mentioned yesterday, I had the opportunity to present to the Council a report on decarbonization and detoxification. And there I spoke about carbon capture and storage, speaking about the amount of chemicals that are used in this technology, the risks associated with leakage of carbon, and also spoke about geoengineering. So the issues of false solutions, so tinkering with Earth systems as a means of diverting attention, these are significant issues. Yesterday, I also spoke about nuclear energy, so the nuclear industry positioning itself as the solution to the climate emergency because it's an energy source free of greenhouse gases. But that does not take into account the impacts of uranium mining, especially on indigenous peoples that for decades have endured the adverse impacts of such mining, or on workers. It does not take into account the huge challenges of managing the disposal of radioactive wastes, and of course the situation in Fukushima with the discharge into the Pacific Ocean of contaminated waters received significant attention from various speakers that took the floor yesterday. So this may explain the case that was brought by Austria recently against the European Commission for labeling nuclear energy as green, so greenwashing. These issues have come up not only in respect of thematic discussions or reports. In my country visit to Italy, one of Solvay's plants went in. There was a lot of controversy as to its assertions on environmental, social sustainability, ESG. There were lawsuits and claims by what are so-called activist shareholders, pointing out that Solvay was greenwashing on its claims of ESG. So there's a lot that needs to be unpacked. Yesterday I spoke about the importance of consumer protection laws, about the importance of investor disclosures, and as you've mentioned, there are international instruments out there in regards to environmental assessment that are also particularly important to dealing with disinformation and greenwashing. So I am really pleased to have the opportunity to once again be with you all in this first panel of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks and join the panel.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And as you just said, we will turn now to one of the instruments that can help. And as I said, it's not a solution and a general fix for all of the problems, but it is definitely an instrument which is used more and more, and which is the question of environmental impact assessments. And so I'm very happy to give the floor now to Mr. Jerzy Jędrzejewska. And Jerzy, you're the vice chair of the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee, which is the treaty body linked to the Aarhus Convention, which is a parent instrument to the Escazú agreement. You're also a professor of European law at Opel University in Poland and at Riga Graduate School of Law in Latvia. You have a very long experience in this field, and you're one of the world leading experts in the question of environmental impact assessment. So as I said before, it's not a legal obligation within the Aarhus Convention, but the provisions of the convention are the guiding instruments for any environmental impact assessment. So, Jerzy, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being with us. It's a very heavy day for you. You'll have to leave us after your talk because you're involved in the hearing of the Compliance Committee right now on an issue linked to Austria. So thank you very much for giving your time for this meeting, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Could I have my slides on?
Here it is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, as you see, neither Aarhus nor Escazú really regulate how to do environmental assessments. they just they are focused on how to use it for the public benefit, how to make it transparent, how the public can participate and challenge the inadequacies in EIA environmental assessments. The only, until now, instrument that regulates this is the ESPO Convention, which you may see here. I was the member of the implementation committee of the ESPO Convention, which is a similar international tribunal that oversees compliance with the environmental impact assessment in a transboundary context. So my talk will be about the means how to use this instrument for the purpose of procedural environmental rights for the public. In other words, generally Aarhus or Eskazu, whatever you'd like to. Well, so first, I give you an overview of what the concept and scope of environmental assessments, then about its role in decision making, and a couple of words about advantages and issues of concern, let's put it mildly. And then something about the decision-making procedures which are not covered by formal assessment procedures, which create problems. So the environmental assessment was invented in the United States, and it is a preventive tool related to planned activities which may have significant impact on the environment. And we have nowadays environmental assessments in all countries all over the world. However, not all of them are the same, and there are basically three models. First is US model, NEPA process that covers all major significant federal actions significantly affecting the environment. So basically everything. This is a formal process with the public involvement, but it's very costly. Therefore, in different regions of the world, modalities have been employed. And one is the one that we have in Europe. I will talk about this in a moment. And there is also a third one. In developing countries, it was invented mostly first in the former Soviet Union for the centrally planned economy. The biggest disadvantage of this model is that the environmental assessment is not a public process because it is conducted by the developer, project proponent, which ends up with really problems for getting properly the views of the public. And we have had cases in the Aarhus Convention because some of the countries, parties to the convention, are also former Soviet Union countries which do have this system. So in the European model, we have separate assessments, not on one procedure like NEPA process, but environmental impact assessment for project, strategic environmental assessment for strategic documents, plans, programs, and so on. Then we have a separate biodiversity assessment, which we call habitat or appropriate assessment in Europe, then a separate water assessment, and a special type of integrated pollution prevention and control assessment for the purpose of the procedure that is regulated in Europe. The role of this formal assessment is, first of all, collection of all information about the possible impact, not only negative, but also positive impact, significant impact of the proposed activity on the environment, but not only on the environment, but also on human health, on social issues and other types of impact. Then its role is demonstration of various interests that are involved in the given proposed activity, whether that is a project or it's a planned program. Then a very important, right from the beginning in the United States, slightly not well observed in Europe, aspect is consideration of different alternatives of achieving the goal. And then the ultimate aim is integration of environmental concerns with economic, social, and other concerns related to proposed activity so that to avoid irreversible effects. The biggest advantage is that this is a public procedure. The difference, as I said, is the third model in the developing country, which are gradually, I'm involved in a number of processes in Central Asia, China, and others, and they are trying to go to this modern system where this is a public procedure, transparent procedure. And usually they consider different options, and American option is too costly. So they rather tend to use the European model because it's for many reasons, it's much more cost effective. So the idea is this is a public procedure. It's transparent, it's meant to be transparent. It allows for the public to give their view, and as the Aarhus Convention, any comments could be submitted, any. That means it is not that only motivated comments or reasonable comments, any comments. And public authorities must take due account of the comments. That does not mean follow, but take due account of all the comments. The means to help it's a requirement for making in environmental studies so-called non-technical summary, which is something which should give the public, but not only the public, but also decision makers. Ministers, usually there is a famous saying, they wouldn't read anything more than one page. So that's the point. But the public should have a non-technical summary to know what is about the proposed activities. And that the role of this is very important because this process provides arguments for future possible litigation where the public could challenge a decision to allow for certain projects to make conditions and so on. What are the issues of concern? In many legislations, there is a very short time for the public to get inspected, to file the EIA reports, or SCA assessment reports, assessment studies. They are usually quite big, very technical. So it's very, very short times are quite often the ways of limiting public input. Inadequate screening and scoping. Screening, there is a special procedure to find out those concrete activities that would require full assessment, because not everything requires full assessment. So first, there is the screening. And quite often, screening is not adequate. That means activities that should be subject to full assessment are not subject to full assessment. Another issue is that once there is a full assessment, then there needs to be an individual scoping in which, for each and every activity, individually, with the participation of the public, there is defined what should be, what impacts should be really taken into account, studied at length at the cost of the project proponent. And here again, we have a lot of tendencies to limit this. Scoping sometimes is not obligatory, sometimes there is no involvement of the public envisaged in scoping. So there are different ways of limiting the role of this. And then we have a major issue is the quality of assessment reports. They are done by consultants on behalf of proponents. And that is all fine. But the problem is that there are a lot of corruption practices, plagiarism between different activities. For some ideas, for some studies, there is a lack of methodology, and that is nowadays with climate change. There is a lot of issues how to assess impact on adaptation, but also mitigation of the proposed activity. And there is still a new area, but also with geoengineering and many other issues, lack of methodology. And on top of this, we have deliberate inaccuracies. What it means? It means that this is all paid by the project proponent. What the project proponent wants to get ahead with the activity. And they pay the consultant. So sometimes they put a pressure on the consultants not to reveal all the issues. There are some ways to avoid it. We don't have time, I believe, how to do it, but there are. I'm just going next week to Georgia to help them introduce the system of quality control, which would be fitting the purposes. Anyhow, another problem is attempts to limit accessibility by different ways. In some countries, you would have that public has access only to the non-technical summary, which is absolutely not in line with the Aarhus Convention. But there are legal solutions like this. Otherwise, that you would have access to the documentation far away from the place where you live, and that we had cases in Spain, for example, where the public had to commute like 65 kilometers because the authorities didn't want to send them electronic copies of the EIA report. So they are all means of limiting public accessibility. And finally, I'm finishing, is with all of these inaccuracies, the lacunas, the gaps, environmental impact assessment is probably the most powerful tool for the public to exert control of what the governments are doing generally. What is the development of the country? Because it's transparent, it's meant to be transparent, it's meant to be public. However, not all the procedures are covered, and most of product control procedures are not covered. You have the similar studies, but this is rarely fully publicly available, except for GMO decision making, which we have in Aarhus a special amendment to this effect. In the European Union, this is also public process. But we have also many other product control procedures which are not so transparent and open for the public. And then we have new procedures which are recently involved for the New Deal, Green Deal in Europe. It is climate proofing, sustainability proofing, and so-called do no significant harm principle. They are very extensive procedures. The problem is that they are not public. They are not part of the assessment procedures which are publicly available. They are within the administration of the member states or EU administration, but still it is not publicly available. And these are potentially very, very powerful tools, provided that, and that's what I'm trying to advocate for the last 2 years in different forums in the in the European Union, that it should get its way into this formal public assessment procedures. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Jerzy. It's really an excellent presentation, and I think it really underlines some of the challenges we're going to have to follow up as the human rights community, because I think it really gives an echo to some of the things we're working. I know that Marcus Rana, the Special Rapporteur, wants to raise a few issues, and you might want to answer to that. May I ask you both of them to do that in a few sentences only, so that we can turn to the different examples afterwards?
One more word. I mean, we have a hearing, if didn't say it. This is against Austria, but what is important, it's about the rights of a neighboring public from the neighboring country, Liechtenstein, which have a right to something which is going on in Austria. And that is something which we regulate in Aarhus, but unfortunately, parties to the Escazú Convention didn't decide to give this right to the foreign public. So this is very important, I think, an innovative approach.
Marcus, short question.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much, Jerzy, for making that presentation. A couple comments. One on the importance of the point that you made about public procedure and the engagement of the public. I was in a conversation years ago about Yucca Mountain in the United States, a repository of proposal for nuclear waste. And one of the speakers was mentioning that the amount of paper in that assessment, it was rooms filled with paper. And so they had to have a team of people going through those papers. So in terms of public accessibility, there's a big question there. There's also a point I want to comment, as you mentioned, the avoidance of irreversible results. Because in the practice of financial institutions, they were much criticized for many years for focusing on mitigation rather than what you've expressed, avoidance. So I wanted to highlight that. And the question, since we have very limited time, is on, so environmental assessment for project specific, you've also touched upon strategic environmental assessment. What is your view about the possibility of moving towards sector? So petrochemicals, agrochemicals as a sector, either in a country or in a region, or as an industry? Could that be possible? Would there be tools to do that? Because that would seem to provide findings that could be quite relevant for all kinds of public involvement on ESG disinformation and so forth. Thank you.
Okay, first a reaction about the amount of information. Yes, that's why in the United States 30 years ago they introduced some limit, and that is standard environmental impact statement report should be about 150 pages. On top of this, there are the annexes, and that is where as the Germans say about the Hund ist begraben, where the details are there. But still, this, if you have enough time, then not maybe the laborers, but qualified NGOs, they have qualified people, experts who could get into this amount of indeed big amount of information and make use of it. And that's what is happening. The problem is not always they have time. We just recently, yesterday, we had a case from Germany where there is an amendment to the Climate Act, and the NGOs had a possibility to comment for it for 1 day. 1 day, can you imagine, for such a big issue? And they're saying, this is ridiculous. How you could really meaningfully get into this documentation, whether it's right or not. So there are means of doing this. And then on this, I don't think that, well, and partially it happens. The procedure should be similar, because otherwise you don't have a level playing field. I mean, the industries do not want to have a different approach. But on the other hand, you have a lot of guidelines how to do it in practice, what needs to be monitored, what needs to be envisaged, what needs to be looked at, examined before activity for different types of industry. In this sense, there is the sectoral approach, but otherwise, I don't think the procedure, I mean, some basic features of the procedure must be exactly the same for all types of activities, even the new ones. So, and that's public transparency, public involvement are among these major features. So I hope I answered.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you, Marcus, for the questions. To be continued, obviously.
Okay, sorry,
and now you have to rush to your hearing, to the preparation of your hearing, which will start at 10:30. So, Josie, a very big thank for being with us. And as I said, it's to be continued. The Geneva Toxic Free Talks will come back on this, because definitely it's an element which is important. And now let's turn to the different examples that we will share now in the rest of the discussion. And there are examples showing why we need instruments to try to avoid some of these false solutions. And so I'll start with Yuyun Ishmawati. Yuyun, you're the co-founder of the foundation Nexus for Health, Environment and Development. You're also part of the steering committee of IPEN, which is the International Pollutant Elimination Network, which is one of the very important international coalition in this field. Yuyun, you have an excellent example precisely of this kind of emerging trends to present to us. The floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Yves. Greetings. Good morning from Bonn. I'm here for the ICCM5 for the next couple of weeks. I would like to share my screen. Is it possible?
Please.
Yeah, okay. Hang on. Will be a tick.
Here we are. Great. We can see it.
See it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Should make it full screen now. Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me to these consultations, Marcos. It's great to have a conversation again with you about this. I hope I could give perspectives from developing countries. Just a quick introduction. IPEN is a global network of more than 600 NGOs in 120 countries. And we work at the local level to translate it into the global policy and then vice versa. And my organization is one of the IPEN participating organization. So this is just the quick outline of my presentation. I would like to start with this because this is the new problem that we've seen all over the world, that due to the increased production of plastics, chemicals production is also increased, and some of the problematic plastics that cannot be degraded naturally or recycled properly are increasing. And plastics life cycles also containing especially chemicals, additives that cannot be recycled, or it will contaminate the circular economy, which is the new jargon that has been promoted to increase the sustainability of products as well as practices. We've seen a lot on the ground in various countries of IPEN participating organizations report also various false solutions. Of course, everyone agree and eager to find solutions to the problems, but we've seen small incinerators being sold, and sometimes it's very easy to find it in Alibaba or in e-commerce because they want to solve the problems at source or on site, but this will create another problem that was not feasible before. And also the use of waste for energy. We just heard something from our colleagues in China, that in China, due to the excellent waste separations and recycling efforts, now the incinerators are they lack of supplies, and this is happening also in Europe. In Europe now they don't have supplies or feedstock for waste to energy plants, so they have to import it from the neighboring countries. Another false solutions that we're hearing more and more now is the co-processing of residuals of plastics into RDF in cement kilns as well as in coal-fired power plants. Last week, I had an opportunity to attend the dioxin conference in Maastricht, and scientists also addressing this issue. For instance, one in Taiwan that monitored the dioxins from incinerators all over Taiwan have seen the decreasing concentrations of dioxins from incinerators in ambient air, but they are concerned now because of the climate net zero approach. They are allowed to use or replace coal with RDF and so on, and that might increase other pollutants, including PFAS in the ambient air. So RDF and SRF has been used or traded since 1990s, but there are more complicated issues now because RDF at the moment are mostly the residuals of plastics that cannot be recycled or low grade values of plastics. And these been traded mainly from developed countries to developing countries. We've seen countries changing policies like Australia that have already adopted the commitment last year that they will not export RDF, but this year they changed their mind. So they are going to export what they call it process engineered fuel. So there are lots of new jargons that have been introduced in terms of looking for solutions, and experts thought that this will solve the problems, our problems of plastic especially. These are the examples of RDF from Indonesia and also from some Southeast Asian countries when IPEN conducted this study in Southeast Asian region. There are different qualities and different compositions, but the one on top right is, they call it fluff instead of pellets or briquettes. Fluff is basically the dry format of plastic packaging because they made it crisp and less humidity and less water. They dried it using bio-drying method, they call it. So as a result, it's very crisp and very dry. In return, it will give high calorific value, which is suitable for cement kiln. This is just an example that RDF have 7 types of grades, but the most traded ones are RDF 5, type 5. And below are the examples from Indonesia, and we collected samples and then analyzed it for the calorific value, different shape, different mixture from organic mixed with unorganic like plastics. And most of them are actually containing plastics residuals, which cannot be recycled. And that's adding to the calorific value. However, the plants or power plants or cement kiln is fine because they are high. I mean, I don't mean to say fine, but what I mean is that in cement kiln, because they have high temperature, all kind of waste will be disappear or co-processed into cement powder. However, even one study shows that even when cement kiln have high temperature, when they process hazardous solid waste into co-processing, they would release dioxins 3 times or double of the previous ones if they do not mix it with hazardous waste. So that is in a cement kiln, and the cement kiln also release more heavy metals. It's like and before it was not there, but then after they mix it with RDF, it's increased. And we know that UNEP has just released a report this year about the chemicals in plastics, and there are a lot of unknown in plastic additives that have been regulated globally. And many studies are actually looking at only single chemicals, but not the cocktails of chemicals effect when they burn in one place. And the same study also shows the pathways of exposure to human from the productions, use, and end of life. I've seen also a lot of papers and studies showing even the harmful chemicals in dust, house dust indoor, and also in offices, because all of the chemicals used in electronics also over a period of time will be degraded and released to the environment. So from the production to use and the end of life, if we introduce the wrong solutions or greenwashings with all kind of technologies that public do not know, or in many countries, they do not have the emission standards yet, not to mention the capacity building of laboratory. It's still lack in developing countries. Within the IPEN network, we try to find a way, the easiest way to monitor POPs in the environment is through chicken eggs, because it's invasive, it's not invasive, it's collecting on the eggs, especially free range around facilities. And with these pathways, the harmful chemicals also entered into our food chain. And this is just a simple explanations. Many studies also shows in milk, especially in Europe, and in Lausanne, a couple of years ago, they found high dioxins in grass, so they do not allow grassing for cattle anymore. So there are a long-term effect of all these interventions, that so-called high-tech or green technology to solve the problems. And this is just the examples that dioxins in eggs that collected by IPEN participating organizations from various countries shows very high concentrations. This is almost equal or probably higher than the Agent Orange village in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. And that is concerning because we were not in a war and not intentionally spreading out the Agent Orange, but dioxins are everywhere now due to the explorations of technology. And a couple of studies also shows that plastic slow degradation will create long-term humanity problems, because this will lead to EDCs affecting hormonal and so on. And more concerning is that the degradation of plastics in soil take longer than the degradations of plastics in marine environment. And even more, the half-life time of HDPE, for instance, it took about 58 years. There are there are more potential transmissions of these chemicals from soil to food chain and to grazing animals. So my key takeaway from this is that we would like to see more genuine solutions. The same amount of money can be put into a proper and better solutions, like promoting zero waste, improving landfills, improving promotions of segregations of waste from source. And then intergenerational justice have to be included or considered as a point in any policy making, because our children and our grandchildren are now going to face a problem when they grow up in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's not fair for my grandson to live in this crappy environment. Capacity building, especially for laboratory analysis and also expertise, it's needed, especially in developing countries, because this will lead the improvement of standards and following the food path of developed countries. And then increased precautions and preventions are needed. I agree with Jerzy before that environmental impact assessment is one of the tools that can be used to prevent and give times to comment that will be more meaningful. We've seen also the evolution of plastic waste trade as PEF, process engineered fuel, or RDF. That will open up another Pandora's box. And then we would like to remind policymakers also to keep their promise. A lot of international conventions already agreed and signed, but many of them also a bit distracted with the lobbies from industry and so on that will distract a little bit of their commitments. So I hope that with these examples, we could learn more. And this is the more resources that you can find within the IPEN website. I'm looking forward to have a question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuyun, for your very comprehensive presentation. I think it gives us a very good view of the global, well, at least one of the global challenges. We'll turn now to a more local situation, although it's always linked to the global evolution. We're staying in the Philippines. It's just show how lively is the civil society in the Philippines, although they're confronted there with very strong issues. Clemente Bautista, you're the International Network Officer of the Kalikasan People Network, and you're very much also involved in the protection of environmental defenders in Asia and Pacific. The floor is used to give us some of the elements you're confronted with in your own situation.
Magandang umaga. Good morning. My gratitude to the Special Rapporteur Human Rights and Toxics and Hazardous Waste, to the Environment Network and their Justice for providing this platform to shed light on the issue of greenwashing and how it affects human rights and environment, particularly in the Philippines. Can I have my slide? Just yesterday, my colleagues Julina Castro and Jed Camano, both environmental defenders in their early 20s, were portrayed as communist terrorist surrenderists in a press conference organized by the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. The truth is that they were forcibly abducted by the military on the night of September 2, 2023, and held against their will in an undisclosed military camp for 17 days. However, they stood strong in their principles. During the press conference, Julina Tamano stated, and I quote, "We were abducted by the military personnel on board a van. We were also forced to surrender because our lives were threatened. That is the truth. We want to highlight today the blatant fascism of the state toward activists whose only fight for Manila Bay. Reclamation projects are ongoing there, and fishermen will lose their livelihood." This statement left the military organizers of the conference dumbfounded. They expected the two will comply with their script. The two environmental defenders, along with various environmental groups and members of society, have been opposing reclamation projects in Manila Bay. In particular, they had been campaigning against the Hydropolis project of San Miguel Corporation, one of the biggest local business in the Philippines. San Miguel is collaborating with two Dutch business institutions, the Royal Buscales Westminster, a dredging company, and a trade-use Dutch state business as trade-use DB, with the trade-use providing a staggering 1.5 billion euros to the San Miguel Reclamation Project. This funding comes from the Dutch people who may not fully comprehend the nature of the project. As early Jersey said, San Miguel employed the environment investigative impact assessment, and they say that the project had no significant effects or impacts to the environment, and this is socially accepted by the communities. This project, including the Marcos government and the proponents, have been greenwashed with promises of economic development, benefiting local communities and the mitigation of climate change impact, such as sea level rise and storm surge protection. However, in reality, these projects, the reclamation projects in Manila Bay, have displaced communities, violated the rights of the people, exacerbated flooding in the adjacent areas, deforested hundreds of hectares of mangroves, and destroyed marine ecosystems. This project will definitely make the coastal communities vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. This illustrates how the Philippine government, under the Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of a dictator in the 1970s, has allowed and protected corporate projects that cause ecological destruction and human rights violation. These are the time lapse of the Hydropolis project. So you could see its impact to the marine ecosystem, and not only that, they will extract a lot of filling materials, and it will come from quarrying, seabed quarrying, and destruction of mountains to fill that area. President Marcos Jr. has presented himself as a climate change advocate, promising to meet carbon emission commitments, conserve natural resources, and protect and rehabilitate the degraded ecological systems in the Philippines. However, after more than a year in office, his government has continued to prioritize large-scale mining, importation of liquefied natural gas, introduction of nuclear power and coal power plants, construction of coal power plants, and mega dams. These projects are marketed as a solution to climate change, but they are, in reality, a greenwashing stories or marketing. In the case of large-scale mining, the extraction and production of minerals such as chromite, nickel, copper have increased. These minerals are marketed as essential for climate-friendly products like electric batteries and solar panels. During the COVID-19 pandemic, big mining was even packaged as a COVID recovery solution. Most of these mining projects have resulted in land grabs from indigenous people territories and agricultural land and communities of peasants, deforestation, the contamination of our rivers and sea, and severe human rights violation, including killings, abduction, legal harassment, illegal detention, militarization of communities. My organization, Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment, had collaborated with Global Witness to document and analyze the killing of environmental defenders in the Philippines. From 2001 to 2022, at least 334 environmental defenders had been killed, with 165 related to mining and 106 related to agriculture or in defense of land grabbing. Many of our organizations, my organization, pioneers, have fallen victim to these human rights violations. It is clear that greenwashing is used by the Philippine government and corporation to conceal their environmental, disruptive, and anti-people projects, being pushed through to the policies like liberalization and privatization. This project won't harm the people and the environment. Engaging and lobbying the United Nations and its various bodies and mechanisms have been part of our advocacy to oppose this project and defend the rights of the people and community to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. As a member of Philippine Universal Periodic Review Watch, and we have a delegation here, I emphasize our call for the UN Human Rights Council and its special procedures and mandates to monitor and investigate the environmental destruction and human rights situation in the Philippines. Your support will empower Julina and Jed, environment and human rights defenders in the Philippines, and their communities to continue their campaign for our rights and ecology. We also support on the proposal to establish more guidelines on managing and monitoring the release of toxic waste and hazardous waste to the environment. This all. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Entang, for bringing us this the realities. As I said, human rights gives an opportunity to do a reality check, and the check is sometimes pretty tough to look at. Thank you for reminding us the impact on environmental defenders. That's the other part, I would say, of the environmental impact assessment. It, of course, to make sure that people are able to stand up for their own rights, are able to speak out. Otherwise, there's just no meaning in having this kind of environmental impact assessments. And in such a circumstance, an environmental impact assessment could also be qualified as being a false solution when it's used as a cover. So greenwashing can also kill. And it's important that we remind us these very tough realities. That's what the human rights system is here for. You also underlined how much also in the field of agriculture, and we have also mentioned already climate change. We see how the connections between the industrial developments and the use of toxic products is being pushed forward and very often qualified as being solutions when they're just increasing the problems. So now we'll turn to Lisa Tostado. Lisa, you're the agrochemical and fossil fuel expert within the Center for International Environmental Law, one of the leading organizations in these fields, part also of IPAN. Like Yuyun, we're very happy to have you with us. And you have also other examples to show about these challenges about false solution. The floor is yours, Lisa.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to speak at this panel, and thank you also to the other panelists who have already outlined some of the examples. Mine is going to touch upon agrochemicals, more specifically fossil fertilizers. So today, the fertilizers that we use consist about half of them are fossil fertilizers, so they're based on fossil fuels, and then react the hydrogen with nitrogen from the air, which makes ammonia. So that is the nitrogen part of fertilizers. And then the other two fertilizers that are used most often are based on potash and phosphorus. They're mined. They also come with their own human rights impacts, but they're not fossil-based. So I focus my presentation on a proposed decarbonization solution for the fossil fertilizer industry. Next slide, please. So that alleged solution is blue ammonia, and I will explain what exactly that is. But please know that this build-out is happening very, very fast. Blue hydrogen and blue ammonia. A lot of public money is being spent on this as we speak, and not always are the public aware of what's going on or even informed. So as I mentioned today, to produce ammonia, which is the basis for nitrogen fertilizers, we need hydrogen, the H2 molecule. And that production today is almost exclusively based on fossil fuels, mostly gas, methane gas, but also coal, mostly in Asian countries. And obviously all these fossil fuels have very dire environmental, social impacts all along the supply chain, from the drilling, the extraction, to transporting, to using them as feedstock or as energy. And then we take nitrogen out of the air to make that react with the hydrogen to make this ammonia. And ever since the 1970s already, we have transgressed the safe planetary boundary for nitrogen. So we have, as humanity, we have taken out too much unreactive nitrogen from the atmosphere, and we created reactive nitrogen molecules that can cause, that run off into soils and waters. They can contaminate drinking water and have, a whole series of environmental and social consequences, such as algae blooms and fish population diminishings, etc. And if we look at the emissions per se, today the fertilizer industry is an under-recognized driver of the climate crisis as well. And the emissions overall, so if we look at all the supply chain emissions from the fossil gas or the coal that is used to produce the hydrogen, and then the very energy-intensive process to create ammonia, and then also the emissions that arise once you apply fertilizers onto the fields, such as nitrous oxide emissions, these emissions exceed those of commercial aviation. So it is a very significant driver of the climate crisis. And that is becoming increasingly clear. So now the fertilizer industry says, you don't worry, we don't have to make absolute reductions in fertilizer use. We have a solution. We just capture the CO2 emissions in that process of hydrogen. And therefore, the hydrogen that we use is low carbon, and the climate impact will vanish. So that's the proposal. And not only that, but ammonia is also discussed as a potential future shipping fuel. So the fossil fertilizer industry and the fossil industry, they're working together to make so-called clean shipping fuel for the future, or clean agrochemicals. And I will argue that they're neither. Blue ammonia, so that is the ammonia still based on fossil fuels, but with carbon capture and storage, does not actually lead to decarbonization and not to detoxification either, because there's no change in the impacts of the fertilizer use, the overuse, especially in some geographies, just because we changed the production method. I will also argue that CCS is not a climate solution to begin with. It doesn't actually mitigate emissions. And CCS, so carbon capture and storage, also creates new problems. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture to make you understand. So we have the methane gas, there's steam reforming happening with other fossil fuels for the energy that is needed to break off the hydrogen molecules. And then we have gray hydrogen. And then if we add carbon capture technology to it, we call it blue hydrogen or blue ammonia if we react it then with nitrogen. And green hydrogen would be based on water. And then we have a lot of renewable energy to run an electrolyzer. And then we could produce green hydrogen. So that in theory would indeed have very low emissions. However, the reality today is that we are extremely far away from having any significant volumes of green hydrogen on the market, and a lot of industries bet on that. So as an alleged bridge to a greener future, there is a lot of investments going into the blue version of hydrogen. But again, today, 100%, almost 100% is based on fossils, and a very, very small fraction is based on fossils with CCS. Next slide, please. So that blue ammonia is based on fossil-derived hydrogen with carbon capture and storage, but carbon capture and storage is not new. It is an old technology that has been deployed many years ago already to actually use it for enhanced oil recovery. So today, 80% of the CO2 that is captured in various industrial plants is actually used to inject it into oil wells to get even the last bits of oil out of there. So it has not led to any significant emission reductions in the first place. It is not effective. It has a very long history of overpromising and underdelivering. The capture rates that were promised were never actually reached. It is not economic. It is very, very expensive, and we could make a lot we could make better use of this money. It is not safe either because you need additional chemicals for the capturing process, and it puts fence line and frontline communities that are already impacted by all these fossil fuels at further risk. There can be CO2 pipeline ruptures with very dire consequences on human health and respiratory diseases. It is not green because you need more energy to run this carbon capture equipment. You have to then transport the CO2 somewhere. You have to build all these CO2 pipelines or even ships. Yeah, that is the so-called energy penalty. So CCS has not proven to actually work, and it creates new risks. And I put in quotes a citation from your report, Marcus. So the inseparable link between CCS and the use of fossil fuels underlines the risks posed by this technology to human rights. And it actually locks in place fossil fuel reliance, also in the agricultural sector, reliance on fossil fertilizers and the associated environmental injustices. Next slide, please. I see that we're running out of time, so I will be quick. So you may think, well, what about green ammonia then? So just a few words on this not being a decarbonization and detoxification strategy for the agrochemical sector either. First of all, green hydrogen uses a lot of land and a lot of fresh water. So that can create further land grabbing issues, etc., because a lot of renewable energy potential is actually in global south countries. It does not address the on-field emissions of fertilizers. As I mentioned, they make up more than 60% of the overall emissions. So they will not change just because we change the production process. It does not address the overuse of nitrogen fertilizers either, because, as I said, it also creates nitrogen pollution, runoff, etc. That would not change either. And for the shipping industry, ammonia is extremely toxic. So if we use it as cargo and as fuel, it is very likely there will be spills also, as we regularly see oil spills happening as well. Ammonia would be more dangerous to fish than oil. So spills would be catastrophic. The combustion also releases large amounts of NOx emissions. It's flammable, etc. So what we actually need is a transition away from the input-based industrial farming model that we have created, and not just change the production process and at best capture a tiny little fraction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Excellent presentation. Let me really give a very warm thanks to the three presenters to the three speakers we just heard, because we saw, and that was the objective of this event. We saw how there is a huge creativity in terminology right now, but that does not help in understanding what is exactly the process. And there's very little references to RDF or to green ammonia in the discussions we have in the field of human rights. And I think it's extremely important that we're talking about this issue. We have really our hands on the process, the chemical process, the industrial developments which are going on right now, so that we can try to be a bit ahead of the curve. And I'm not sure that in the field of human rights right now, we're at that place. So we hope by this event to contribute to this little bit. As you said, Lisa, we're a bit late on time. We will still take 5-10 minutes to conclude this discussion, because of course, first, we don't have any questions online, and I don't know if there were any questions here in the room. But of course, we'd like now to hear the comments from the Special Rapporteur on these different elements. But first, let me see, anybody in the room would like to raise an issue or have a question? If that's not the case, then I will immediately turn to you, Marcus. As a Special Rapporteur, you heard all of these different challenges that we have in front of us. What is your take at the end of this discussion?
Well, thank you very much, Yves. Since we're short on time, I'll be very brief. And one of the points that comes across very clearly is that there's a big debate as to the framing of things. As Lisa Tostado just was mentioning, we're dealing with green and blue and gray, and the terminology of the panel is on greenwashing, and now we're maybe also going to start talking about blue washing. I mean, who's going to appropriate itself from the color blue? So this is, of course, a big point, because if we lose the framing from the beginning, then it's in the public opinion, it's very hard to reverse that. So that's the first point I thought I'd underline. Another is that As Clemente Bautista has pointed out on a specific project, the issues of greenwashing are not just about the global debates and narratives that I spoke at the very beginning on plastics, at the world, pollution as a global issue, or carbon capture and storage as a abatement technology. They're also at the very local level where local communities, indigenous peoples are suffering impacts from projects. And so what are the tools to deal with disinformation at that level? I think it's very important, as you also highlighted, Eve, how Clemente Bautista reminded us that these are not just academic or conceptual debates. Lives are at stake. The criminalization, the persecution, the harassment, the murder of environmental activists, environmental and human rights defenders is certainly something that is of extreme concern. And I also want to point out how Yunis Mawati takes us through what can be seen as complex chemical formulas, but in the end of the day, they come again down to the right to live in a toxic-free environment and the kinds of disinformation strategies that are being put forward by the chemical industry in various ways. So from the project to the sector to the global, so when we spoke about development policy in the country, there's a range of levels where this is happening, and I think we need to really look at the tools available. Jerzy spoke about environmental assessment. I spoke earlier, or hinted rather, about investor disclosures and rules. I mean, recently the US regulator of the stock market has brought legal action against Vale for misrepresentations on the safety of its dams after the Mariana and Samarco dam ruptures in Brazil. We need to see much more of that, but we also, in order to do that, need clearer standards upon which courts, also regulators, may be able to take these cases forward. So maybe that's a next panel, but at the end of the day, what's clear is that disinformation undermines democratic governance. In so doing, it undermines our ability to enjoy a healthy life. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for these concluding remarks. As you were mentioning, how a number of colors now are used in all directions. Let me just note that there is an interesting comment in the chat about also the color pink, which is also used now in the EU. So we do want to have a life with lively colors all around. It was a bit of a gray situation that was presented to us. So we'd like to have a change in colors, but not a misuse of the colors. So perhaps I'll just finish here on this elements. As we said right at the beginning with the discussion with Jerzy and Joszka, this is to be continued. We wanted to bring in a number of these elements on the table. Thank you very much for all the work you're doing, Marcus, as Special Rapporteur. It helps the whole of the discussion on the toxics and chemical issues, because the human rights gives us a possibility to have a global look at these issues and not just the fragmented approach we have through the international environmental law. And this is absolutely needed. And as Yuyun is right now in Bonn for the discussion of the international conference on chemical management, a very important moment. I know that you will be joining them next week over there, Marcus. It's very important that this international conference also has a human rights-based approach so that it can deal with these issues with coherence. You showed very well, Marcus, how all of these elements are linked, and we need to have this global approach. Human rights can help to that. So actually this leads me to do the announcement of the next meeting we will have in the Geneva Toxic Free Talks, which will be here in the same room and at 1:15. And precisely, we will be talking about how can we bring human rights at the center of the discussions. There's not only ICCM 5 going on in Bonn, but there's a number of other international negotiations until the end of this year. Human rights, and we just saw that today at this in this meeting, human rights must be a central element in these discussions. we'll see how we can do this at the next discussion of this Geneva Toxic Free Talks. Very warm welcome and very great thank you to all of you participating to this discussion. A huge thanks to the speakers and for their presentation. And also a huge thanks to the Geneva Environmental Network, to you, Diana, and also the whole team which is here in the room. Without the Geneva Environmental Network, who's a partner in the organization of this event, the Geneva Toxic Free Talks would not exist. So a real very well thank you to the whole team. I wish you a good day, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you all at 1:15. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, Diana, and everyone.
Thanks a lot.
The summary, etc., everything will be available on the webpage of the event, and the link is on the screen or was sent through the invitation. And there was a question on the definition of greenwashing, but this is something we can.
We'll come back to that then.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.